Hi, Year 10. Okay, before you start, make sure please that you have the questions I want you to answer. So that's the worksheet called Cybersecurity Homework 1. That can be, you can have it on the computer or print it out, or you can just answer the questions on a piece of paper. But you may wish to have it now so that you can see the questions as we go through, or you can answer it at the end. That's your choice. Okay. So this unit of work is all about cybersecurity, and that's the definition there that we looked at last lesson. We focused last lesson a lot on the importance of data, why we need to protect it, its value within an organisation. What we learnt last lesson is about the different cybersecurity threats. Just an overview. Cybersecurity, it could be in terms of hackers, phishing, malware. And we also looked at hacktivism. I asked you to find out about hacktivism. Some of you may have noticed in the news this week about the anonymous group and their message to the Minneapolis Police Department in response to the murder of George Floyd. So, how do we protect ourselves from cyber criminals? Well, probably the most common method is password protection. Okay, we need good passwords in order to protect our data. A weak password is a password that is easy to detect. That could be by humans and or by a computer. And there are lots of programs out there which can be used to guess passwords. People often use really obvious passwords such as names of children or their house number or their pet's name, their favourite sport, and things that their friends or things that could easily be found out over social media. So we need to make sure that we're not making any of those mistakes with passwords. So how do we set a secure password? Well, a lot of programs will use validation checks. Now, a validation check is something that's set on the system to make sure that you include certain criteria. So in this case, there's a length check, possibly between 10 and 15 characters, although a lot will require only 8, but that the password will include a mixture of numbers, upper and lowercase characters, and symbols. Now that's called a format check. So these are 2 validation checks that a system can put on to make sure that you use a strong password. Now, on the previous slide, we looked at what made a weak password and things like your name, your date of birth, things like that. But if you can't validate for those, the computer system can't know that the password you're using is in fact your name, that's just down to personal practice and having that good practice to do that. There's some examples of the worst passwords of 2019. If you see your password on that list, then you should be very concerned. Only 1 in 6 people in Britain use their pet's name as a password. Or sorry, not only, that's 1 in 6. That's quite a lot, isn't it? So yeah, some passwords to avoid, please. Now, a lot of devices will come with a default PIN or password, and the research suggests that 20% of those have never been changed. Do you fall into that category? Do you always change yours? I have to admit that there are a couple of occasions where I haven't changed mine, and I probably should have done. The mobile phone hacking scandal was it went on for a number of years, and it finished in 2012, and it involved the News of the World, and their journalists, encouraged by the organisation itself, would regularly use public voicemail systems and mobile phone numbers of celebrities, well-known people, people of interest, and then access their voicemail. And they were able to do that because if they tried the default PIN number, which was often unchanged, they were then able to access and listen to those messages. Now that impacted, as I say, a number of of well-known individuals, members of the royal family, Sienna Miller, who else? Yeah, no, there was a lot of people impacted there. So not a great system, and it is, you know, it just highlights how important it is to change your PIN number. You know, so misconfigured access rights. Now this is a weakness of organisations. This is an area where an organisation may make mistakes there in terms of setting up a system, a network, and each user on that network would have what we call access rights. In school, you have access to your home drive and to the shared drive and the shared documents drive. Now, with the shared drive, you're able to read and to download files, but you can't delete any files, you can't change those files on there, and you can't add any of your files. That's because of the access rights that have been set up. On the shared document drive, you can access, you can add, you can delete, so you have higher access rights. Now, within an organisation, depending on what job you do, you know, what department you work in, you will have different access rights. It's really important that for security, people only have access to the areas that they need in order to do their job. Now, sometimes within an organisation, people move, change roles. So one of the weaknesses is that they don't necessarily change the access rights. So that person may have access to more than what they need to. And that's a procedural mistake there. So how do organisations detect where they're vulnerable? How do they know what cyber attacks they might fall victim to? Well, as I say, weaknesses could exist in their procedures, as I mentioned there, in terms of what happens when somebody changes role, for example. So a procedure is about the way in which organisations do things. Weaknesses could be in the operating system itself, it could be in software configurations, and it could be in employee behaviour. So, you know, what employees do, leaving themselves logged on perhaps when they go for a break or go and take their lunch and they're away from their desk. You know, that's obviously a high risk of unauthorised access there. Now, in order for an organisation to know where its risks are, where the vulnerabilities are, they can do something which is called penetration testing. Now, that is where they use the same techniques a hacker would try, but they aim to identify weaknesses rather than stealing any data. Okay, and that's essentially to manage the risk, because you identify the targets, you identify any possible entry points by trying to break in, and then report back and say, this is where you are vulnerable, this is where you are at risk. Now, there are two types of penetration testing. We have black box testing and white box testing. Now, with black box testing, they're given no more information than a potential hacker may have, so it's from the outside attempting to get in. Whereas in white box testing, testers are given as much information that an employee, i.e. an insider, might have, because, you know, a rogue employee is just as much of a risk as a hacker. When I say a rogue employee, that could be somebody who's maybe disgruntled, they're not happy in their role, they feel that they've been hard done to, and they have some malicious intent to, you know, to try to get back at their employers. Okay. Now, in terms of hacking, and some of you I'm sure will know this, but hackers are, they can be split into different groups. you tend to see in films and in the news black hat hackers. So those are the hackers who have criminal intent. They want to steal data, they want to do some damage. But we do have what's called white hat hackers, and these are ethical hackers. So they're employed to put their skills to the test and to try to find those vulnerabilities. So when we talk about penetration testing, that could be done by a white hat hacker. They'll often be employed by the companies, so it's you know, they're given the access in some cases, whilst they won't be given usernames and passwords, for example, but it's like they have permission to hack in beforehand. Now, there are some hackers who fall in between, and they're called grey hat hackers. They're looking for vulnerabilities. They will report these vulnerabilities, but sometimes they'll be asking for a bit of a ransom. They'll want a reward. And the difference between a grey hat hacker and a white hat hacker is that a white hat hacker has agreed beforehand that they will hack into that system. The grey hat hacker does that without the knowledge of the organisation, without the organisation's permission, which isn't legal. Unauthorised access is against the law. It goes against the principles in the Computer Misuse Act. Is it ethical? That's up for debate, isn't it? I suppose it depends what you do with that information and how you handle it. I think that if a hacker, a grey hat hacker, without permission hacks into a system and then reports that damage, whilst they have broken the law, they are, if they're sort of reporting back on where the weaknesses are, you could argue that they're doing a good service there, something positive. Okay, so that's it. This is what hopefully you're able to do now. And as I say, you've got some questions to answer. Please submit these questions via ClassCharts. There will be a Zoom call on Wednesday this week. If you have any questions, if there's anything that you don't understand, please make use of that. Okay, thank you very much.